Are you ready to learn from someone who has had almost 20 years experience in his industry and really found his niche? This is the Scalable podcast, where every single episode we're bringing on amazing guests who are experts in their field. And right now on season 5, we are exploring a lot of agency owners or service-based business owners and how they've been able to start and scale their business. I am your host, Lacaba, the co-founder of 2XU. And if you're ready to ditch the grind, let's go over and scale you. Now, our guest today is the CEO of Flagship LMS, a company specializing in full-service modal hosting and administration. He has worked in the e-learning industry since 2007 and has lived and worked around the world in Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon. His team is known for launching fully branded LMS platforms in just 1 week, helping clients move from concept to execution without wasted time. Hey, so please help me welcome our guest today, Christopher. Hey, Christopher.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, I should say.
Well, we're excited to have you because in a lot of ways, when I was looking up your website, I was looking at what you do. I was like, that is very interesting and very specific. But before we would dive into your business, I would love to know, who was Christopher before the business? Like, who was that person before all of this, basically?
So I grew up in Alaska, and my last couple of years there was in Juneau, which is the capital, and it's a really small town. There's about 30,000 people. It's surrounded on 3 sides by mountains and 1 side by water, so you can't drive to it. You either have to take a boat or you have to fly in. And it was a great place to escape from as a young person. And so my escape was into the Marine Corps. And so I spent 12 years in the Marines. I was 7 years enlisted and 5 years as an officer. And got a taste of travel while I was in the Marine Corps and decided that I was going to keep doing that once I got out. And I spent another about 14 and a half years or so after I got out traveling and working Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, a lot of different countries, and absolutely, enjoyed it. And my work throughout all of that post Marine Corps was in the education sector. Most of it was in online learning, but I didn't actually start in that. I started, as most people do, in the classroom. So I was teaching elementary and middle school students in Korea. I was teaching English. From there, I moved into universities. I've taught in 3 universities, and I taught for the Korean Army's Military Intelligence School. So I taught for their officers, staff NCOs, special forces, and even their Secret Service.
That's very interesting kind of background, because we don't hear a lot of people coming up from military to then just teaching and teaching like English, and of course there's Secret Service to the point as well. What's kind of, out of the different countries that you taught English, which one did you not really enjoy the most, but you were kind of like, oh, this is I'm learning about the culture at the same time? What kind of feeling, which country gave you that kind of feeling?
Well, you are living and working in the culture the entire time, so you can't help but learn about every country that you are living in. The one I think that was the most challenging was Saudi Arabia, because it was so vastly different from anything that I had previously experienced. And the social norms at that point were so rigid. I mean, they're still very strict, but they're not nearly as strict now as they were. That was, quite an eye opener. I think the most enjoyable was probably Korea. That's the area where I spent my first it was 4.5 years, I guess it was. And that part I really loved, because I had traveled there in the Marines and worked with the Korean Marine Corps. And so it was kind of coming back to that. And it's a wonderful society to live and be part of.
That's super cool. It's interesting because you basically got immersed in so many different cultures and had to teach them a language that comes so naturally to you, but then at the same time you also have to learn their language and their culture, just so that it's easy for you to relate essentially what you're teaching to them. And what was kind of your favorite part about that, of like either being a traveling teacher or just being someone who taught a lot of different people?
So teaching English overseas, at least at that time, I'm sure it's probably pretty similar now, but this was back in, I started back in 2003, January of 2003. And at that time, it was very much a backpacker culture. And so you would get people in your location from all over the world, every English-speaking country, and even some whose language, who were particularly good at English, but for whom it was a second language. And so that part I think was really the most enjoyable, was meeting people not only in the local culture, but also from around the world, kind of doing the same thing. And they compare experiences, and you spend your nights, hanging out, and you travel together and those kinds of things. And so these were opportunities that I would not have otherwise had to meet so many different people. And I really enjoyed that part. Probably not unlike your previous job as a reporter, I'm guessing.
That's right. That was actually why I wanted to become a journalist, was to be able to travel the world. And now I did it with business. So it still came out full circle. So with that,
That's
like
great.
You literally went from small town, not really trapped, but like then going around the world, going to places that probably not even like 10% of your high school classmates have ever been to now
I'm sure less,
get a part where you've then turned that into basically your journey of like turning that into the business. Like, what was the shift over from traveling so much and then now living where you are now, and kind of starting that business off? What was that journey like?
So there was two major shifts. The first major shift was changing from in-person teaching to online learning, and that happened in 2007. At that time, I was working in a school where they had this new piece of software that I'd never heard of before called a learning management system. And when I was exposed to this thing for the first time, I as a teacher in the classroom suddenly realized that I could take everything that I had to repeat every time, a lecture or an analogy, something along those lines, and I could record it one time well, and then that asset was available to every class 24 hours a day if they wanted it, and I never had to say the same thing again. And that to me was just revelatory. And to be able to do that not only for myself, but also to be able to help other instructors who had maybe not yet encountered that software, or who had not sort of embraced it fully. So that became kind of my calling, if you will. I became a learning management system administrator, and I did continue to teach in the classroom, but the majority of my time was usually dedicated to bringing that platform and my knowledge to whatever group of instructors I was with in that location. So that's kind of how I got into online learning. Since 2007, that's all I've been doing. And then how I came to the business side of it was at the time, this was in about 2013, there was the war in Syria broke out, and I was living in Lebanon at that time with my ex-wife and my daughter, who was just about a little less than 2 years old at the time. And the problem with the war in Syria was that they had a huge refugee crisis. And so all the refugees were moving to Lebanon, the next door country. And so about 1 in 4 people was a refugee. And that brings with it all of the problems that you would normally associate with a conflict of that type. And so the humanitarian portion of that kind of forced us to relocate back to the States. There were things like, childhood vaccines for my daughter that were unavailable because there were just such the social network was being taxed by this influx of people. So we came back to the United States, and I took a job with the Peace Corps as their LMS administrator. And then from there, it was a succession of jobs in the United States as an LMS administrator until the last company that I worked for was an LMS company. And I was one of their client success managers. So I had a portfolio of about 25 different companies that I worked with. And it was just a truly abysmal software. It was the worst software in the world. It had more bugs. I can't begin to tell you how bad this was. And I spent my whole time, listening to customers complain and yell at me and calling me names and, cursing me for this thing that I couldn't control. And I realized at that point that, I can probably do this as good as this particular company can. And so I said, I'm going to hang out my own shingle. And that was 8 years ago, and we haven't looked back.
That's super cool. And it's so interesting how the world shifting is always like a good push to either be able to go back to roots or to be able to shift. Essentially, it's something that you've kind of been putting off. But it's also interesting how you got into that so early. Like, I don't think I've ever come across my very first like video course. I think in 2015, I think was the very first time that I was like, oh, people can like learn through a course like online, and I could just buy it. And I could just go through this like over and over again and then give it to someone else as well. And it's such a interesting industry to be in as well. I remember coming across Udemy for the very first time. I was like, all-in-one platform. Like, oh, I don't have to just buy from this one first one. I could keep buying from this. And you've seen its evolution, sounds like, from the very, very start as well. And I like how you went like, oh, we can do this better. Like, let's do it. Like, so when you started, what was kind of the main thing you had to learn? Because it's always, I always talk about this, where when you're becoming an entrepreneur, people usually go into it either from like a technician point of view, like sort of similar as you, like, you know how this works. Now I want to go into business about it. Some people go into it like a consultant point of view, or some people just kind of go into it just because they're curious. So you went from technician to entrepreneur. What was that journey like for you of having to switch your mindset from, okay, now I'm from me the one teaching other people how to do it to me managing the people to teach people how to do it and how to use it?
Well, and that's a great way to sort of encapsulate that too. It was, and as you know, definitely, and as I'm sure a large majority of your listeners know, being an entrepreneur and owning a business has nothing to do with whatever that particular business is. So, for example, I am comfortable right now that I could run a plumbing supply store. I don't know anything about plumbing, but I understand how to make that work. At the time, I knew absolutely everything about being a learning management system administrator, which has nothing whatever to do with running an LMS company. There are so many other moving parts. And so, So I liken being an entrepreneur to, especially a starting entrepreneur, as just being someone who is willing to get punched in the face every single day. And eventually, you either just lay on the mat and give up, or you just keep standing back up, and eventually you stop getting punched. But it's really painful, and it happens a long time. So I don't know if that analogy helps, but
I usually liken it to you're literally building your car as you're driving it. It's like those things will fall off, but you still have to keep driving, or else you're gonna fall off yourself. So it's such
that's a less martial metaphor. I like it.
Well, the getting punched is also a very visceral one of like, that's exactly how it feels. So as the last couple of years have gone by, what evolutions have you seen in the world of LMS? Like I said, for me, like I only saw it once it was like out for the public. Like you were there as it was starting, as the beginning, you were teaching other people how to do it. But like in the last couple of years, what has that been shift and evolution been for you?
So the initial platform that we started working with was an open source platform called Moodle. And when I started, it was on version 1.7. So it was really in its infancy, and it was clunky and it was ugly. And it was, there's nothing sexy about this platform at all. I love this platform, because it is probably the most robust, the most capable, the most feature-rich learning management system out there. So I encourage everybody to use it, but feature-rich is also the one side of the coin. The other side is complicated. And so that's why, I have a job, and that's why my company exists, because we can make things very simple for people. But the thing that I've learned, or that I've seen learning management systems in general develop into, is they have become much slicker, much more appealing to the average person. And the authoring tools, I'm not a big fan of authoring tools, I'll just say that outright, but the authoring tools, things like Adobe Captivate, Articulate Storyline, EXE iSpring, all of these different platforms allow people who normally don't have much in the way of instructional design skill to be able to put together some pretty sexy offerings. And again, I'm not a fan of those. I don't think that they are the best andragogically for your users, but on the other hand, they are ubiquitous. And so that kind of democratization of training has allowed people to create courses like all of the ones that you mentioned previously, all the different platforms that people can put training on. Now, I encourage it. The more people who can put ideas out there, the more information that can be put out there for people to consume, I think just makes everybody better.
Sure. I remember the very first time I created a course. I have no idea when it was. I think 2017, 2018. Of just having to learn from scratch. Like, this is how you can break things down into a module. This is how then you can start recording. This is how we can then start marketing. So for me, like, let's say you met the Leanne from like 2018 who was like, okay, I have no idea how to start a course, but I have an idea I want to share. Like, what would the process look like? Like, what would be the process you would walk them through look like?
Sure. So we've actually really refined our processes in the last 8 years. Everything that we do has a checklist right now. And for building a course, our checklist is about 35 different steps. We don't create training in the sense that we are going to use your subject matter experts. We're going to tap them for their knowledge, and then we're going to organize that into something that is, absorbable by your audience and retainable, most importantly. And so the start of that process, if you were the subject matter expert, is I would sit down with you and I would say, okay, there's some terminology that we need to know so that we are communicating on the same wavelength. So the first thing that you have to absolutely know, because it's the first thing that I'm going to ask you, is what is your terminal learning objective? In other words, what are the people in your course supposed to be able to do at the end of the course that they couldn't do at the beginning of the course? And we have to start there. And I see so many people just start building. They just start taking all their PDFs and PowerPoints that they've got, and they start putting them online and, kind of organizing them. And, I need a quiz and I'll put that here. And that's the last thing that we want to do. That part's really simple once you get the framework in place, but that framework has to start with what's that final objective? Because until we know that, there's no real way for us to be able to develop a path to get there.
Gotcha. I like that you're starting with the end in mind. Just because, like I'm guilty of that, of like just putting things up. I'm like, oh, here's the resource here, here's the resource there. But it is different when you start from the point of view of like, okay, for the person who's going to experience and learn through what's that endpoint, and then working backwards from there. What do you think has been kind of with that kind of business, especially like I said, it's very niche, it's very specific. What has been kind of the, I guess, not so nice parts of it? Like, well, what kind of the things that are still a little bit of a headache, years later?
Yeah. So, less of a headache now, but one of the things that really bit me hard early on was I was very good with the front end of the software. As an administrator, this is the client-facing portion of the software, and I can help you use the settings and solve your problems. I can make it look good for you, et cetera. But the back end of it, the database, the web application files, the Moodle data folder, all of those kinds of things, the content delivery network, all of those nuts and bolts on the back end were completely foreign to me. And so when we started, this is how naive I was. When we started this company, when I started this company, I had a part-time developer and me. That was it. And we had one server that we were using from Bluehost that had 4 gigabytes of RAM, I think, on it, which, if any of your users know, is not much. It was woefully underutilized, under-equipped. And my first client out of the gate, swear to God, was Planet Fitness. And I kept Planet Fitness. They had a year contract with me, and God bless them. They did their best to work with me, and they kept the contract for a year. And I just, every single day, there was something that we had to deal with, because I just didn't have the technical knowledge on the back end, and we didn't have the bandwidth, we didn't have the memory. There's so many things we didn't have for these guys, and they were brilliant. Thank you very much to Planet Fitness for sticking with me that first year. But at the end of it, they just said, look, Chris, we love you, but we need something that is going to kind of be more in line with what we need. And it totally deflating when you get a client like that right out of the gate, and then they leave you and they just say, essentially, we're breaking up with you because you're not good enough. And, wow. Yeah, that was a real kick, a real punch in the stomach. So, we learned that whole year, and we've been developing since. And now, our infrastructure now is incredibly robust, and we can handle. We've got the Pennsylvania State Teachers Union, the Maryland Teachers Union, Johns Hopkins University. We got big clients with lots of users, and we're totally able to support them now. But it was all because, we had one selfless client that was willing to put up with our mistakes.
It's funny because we always remember our first client, of like when we still had to we had this big vision of like, oh, this is what the business is going to be. Now we actually have to run them through the process that we don't know what works or what doesn't yet. And it's always that process that, again, everyone else goes through, just because unless you bought into a business, even then you still kind of remember the first few people who believes in you. So hats off to Plant Fitness then. So what's then today, what's the thing that excites you? What's your favorite thing about having the business, especially having the business for this long? What's that thing that oh, okay, this is the next thing that we're going to go into? What's that thing that excites you?
Well, I got to tell you, and you've mentioned this before, but artificial intelligence is absolutely just 100% changed the landscape for learning, and particularly agentic AI is absolutely amazing. So for your listeners who don't know the difference, artificial intelligence, like a large language model like ChatGPT, is great because it has tons of knowledge, and you can ask it things and it'll organize things for you and it evaluates SIFT, etc. But it doesn't do anything. And so the alternative to that is what's called agentic AI, which is something like Replit, for example. If your clients have never used that, you give it commands and it will execute those commands and actually build something for you. And with that, that is absolutely amazing stuff, because anybody can have an idea now and put something down. It can create an app or create software for it. What that allows a learning management system to do is a platform like ours, for example. You can have what's called a sidecar, which is essentially a piece of software that runs independently of your main software. So this would be separate and apart from the learning management system, but they're connected together. And that connection allows the agentic AI to do things within your platform. So maybe it's building the skeleton of a course for you, and it can do that at scale. Or maybe it has to do with processing the user's information in their database. What courses are they clicking on? How much time are they spending on those courses? And then being able to either recommend additional courses for them. There's limitless possibilities to what you can do when you've got somebody who is essentially a 24-hour worker, but is 1,000 times faster than the average human. It's amazing. And we are only now at the very tip of the iceberg. I can honestly say I don't know what the world will look like in 5 years, but it's going to be drastically different from where we're at now.
That's super cool. And I love that you totally adopted it, because I think this is now 40 episodes in. I've interviewed a lot of people on the podcast where they're still a little bit wary about AI. They're still like, oh, I'm not so sure yet how to apply it. But for you, you've totally been able to starting to adapt to it. You've learned essentially the difference between just AI and agentic AI. And I can see so many ways already just in your industry where it can minimize a little bit of that friction that you also had at the very beginning, but also just minimizing friction for user experience. So just okay, from user point of view, I don't need to know all the things that go into the back end, but then I get the seamless experience where I know where to go next, or I know where to get stuck. I can imagine that if someone had 10 different courses they're going through, as an example, extreme example, but if they're stuck on course B, and they went to course C, you can go back, what was wrong here? What can we do to make this a little bit better? Or if someone breezed through one course, oh, how was that? What was the thing that made that be an easy course for you to go through? So I can imagine that it's one of the tools in your tool belt, basically, it'll help you kind of keep moving things forward. And within your business, what was the thing there's always that moment where people say that their business started clicking. It's not always the straight clicking, but what would you say was that moment of from Planet Fitness to now being the back end of universities. What was that click through moment for you?
So there was actually two real aha moments that completely changed the way that we do business. The first one was early on. Business was hard to come by, and so I have experience not just with a single learning management system platform, but also with 4 or 5 others in addition to the one that we normally work with. And at that time, just trying to keep the lights on, I was taking work in lots of different platforms. And, the work that I couldn't do, I would be farming out to other people who had specialties. So it could be, D2L Brightspace and Cornerstone On Demand and, Blackboard and Canvas and all of these different platforms. And what we were becoming very rapidly was the jack of all trades and the master of none. And so whenever there was no business in the Cornerstone On Demand field, that platform, then that contractor would go without work. And that obviously is a source of problems. So there was a book that we read. It was called The $100 Startup. And, essentially what the message that I took from one portion of that book was you have to be in a niche market. And if you're not, then it becomes really, really difficult for you to try and be that jack of all trades. And it's going to suck because you're going to have to tell clients no. You're going to have to tell clients who normally would give you money, you're going to have to say, I can't take your business anymore much as I'd like to, because we're going to be specializing only in this one particular platform. And that hurt because I had to let contractors go, and I had to say, I've had this relationship with you for, a couple of years, but we can't work with your company anymore because you're using the wrong platform. And once we got over that initial pain, and we specialized in one single platform, it became much easier for us because now our skill sets and our tools are much more refined, much more succinct, much more focused. So that was the first step, I think. The second step was I discovered a book called The Checklist Manifesto by a guy by the name of Atul Gawande. And this was another sort of clouds are parting, rays of sunshine kind of moment. He was a surgeon in a hospital, and he did a lot of studies about post-surgical complications. And what he found out was that in hospitals with surgical teams who did not use checklists, people had lots of problems after the surgery. And, a checklist for him in something like a surgery is there's a lot of steps, but it's very simple things like count the number of sponges before you do the surgery, count the number of sponges after you do the surgery, and they should match. And if they don't, investigate. And so this was, he looked at people like airline pilots who would never think of leaving the ground or even turning the aircraft on without going through a startup checklist, a pre-flight checklist, in-flight checklist, an emergency checklist, landing, and all of these things. It served to ensure that the product that you end up with, or the process that you're going through, ends up the same every single time, and it's replicable. And it doesn't matter whether you're stressed or whether you're tired or whether you've had a really bad day. Everybody knows what the next step in that checklist is. And if it's detailed enough, everybody knows what that end product is going to look like, regardless of what else is going on around you. And that allows you to standardize your delivery of your service or your product or whatever it happens to be to your clients. And prior to that, we would do a migration, we can get your data from point A to point B, but the steps were sometimes the same, sometimes different. Maybe we missed something, I have a different developer today than I had yesterday. And so there was always a problem. But with the checklist, that allows me to ensure that the French fries, as the analogy goes, taste the same in McDonald's everywhere around the world.
I love that both of those came from books. Like I'm a wide reader myself. Like typically, like in my home, I think I have like 500 to 700 books. I tried to count one time and it was too many books. But nice. It is different when you start getting ideas in that aha moment of like you're stuck on this one thing and you get that right book at the right time. And I'd love to hear about Checklist Manifesto. I didn't even hear about that. I'm a huge systems nerd. I like optimizing and making sure things are in a nice SOP every single time. So I love that thought of, now I'm going to add that to my reading list of making sure that one on your first aha moment of niching down, which like I said at the beginning of this podcast, like you have a very specific niche. That way people know exactly like, oh, I'm going to go and work with Christopher because I know he's the guy for this. He knows what he's doing. And at the same time on like creating the systems, creating the checklists, it's true because every single time, if you want the same result every single time, I like calling it your bulletproof system. So like either anything that happens in the business, you have this thing that basically you are ready for it just because you have the systems to basically to back up. If one person gets sick, read the SOP, follow it thoroughly, and you'll do the same job as this person who just suddenly got sick. You have the continuity basically every single time. So thank you so much for like sharing all of that. You've given me a lot of things to think about that I haven't thought about in a while. So super excited to also probably re-listen to the podcast myself. But as kind of the world has evolved, like I said, you've seen the evolution of like your business. You've also gone for a lot of personal evolutions in your life, especially as an entrepreneur. As everything is evolving, AI, health, if you were able to clone you perfectly, like you, the Christopher, either you are now or you could clone yourself like 10 years ago, depending on who you want to clone. If there were like 10, 100, 300 Christophers, there's a whole army of you out there in the world. How would you want to impact or shift the world in one way or the other?
That is a really interesting question. There are so many things that I would love to do but don't have the time to be able to invest adequately in all of those things. And they all tend to revolve around software. A lot of them revolve around educational software. I think I'll give you one example. There is a great piece of software out there, and they had it. I'm not sure if it's still around anymore. And essentially what it does is it takes input from all of your different devices, your Fitbit, your Garmin, your Apple Watch. And what it does is it takes all that data and it synthesizes it and it develops patterns. The patterns are things like, for example, it will say, you are 25% more productive on a Monday when it's cloudy, for something. Maybe this information is useful for you. Maybe it's not. Maybe the patterns have no meaning whatsoever, but it's interesting to have all of these different data points combined together to show you something that could potentially be something in your life that you could tweak or adjust that would make drastic improvements, but you were unaware of the combination of factors. You are substantially less productive on Thursday afternoon when you haven't had 2 cups of coffee in the morning, whatever it happens to be. So those kinds of software out there, it would probably revolve around being able to deliver more information and more systems for people to be able to enhance their own lives. I think once individuals are able to maximize their own potential, their own productivity, then that has a huge knock-on effect because they can then give that information to everybody else, and the ripple effect changes society. So that's what I would try to do. I would try to help people maximize or optimize their own personal productivity and experience so that they can then do the same thing for others and branch out from there.
That's super cool. Educator through and through still. Christopher, how can people find you? How can people connect with you and hopefully even support you in that vision of yours?
I would love for people to start by coming to flagshiplms.com and just take a look at our offering. Even if you're not interested in a learning management system or you're not at the point where you think you need somebody like us, you can schedule a call with us. It's completely free to talk. I am always interested in hearing what other people's journeys, their educational journeys and solutions to educational problems look like. Even if you're just starting out in the entrepreneur world and maybe you need a little bit of help on how to do some small training cheaply, I'd be happy to sit and talk with you. And then short of that, if you don't want to do that, you can always check me out on LinkedIn. And I'd love to connect with you there and maybe have another conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Christopher, for your time today and for sharing about your very wealth of experience and how you see the world.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And it's good talking with you.
And of course, you guys will find all of Christopher's links in the description below if you guys are watching this on YouTube, or you can find out more of his info on 2XU website. If you guys liked this episode, make sure to hit that like button wherever you guys are watching this. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the future episodes on the Scalable podcast. And as always, I hope you guys have an amazing and fantastic day, and with that, small steps matters. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!